I tried a cheap mattress cooling device. Now, what is mattress cooling? The idea is that for optimal sleep, there is an optimal temperature. This could be either warmer than the mattress currently is or colder than the mattress currently is. In order to not have to get a new bed and a mattress, you then can have a sheet that basically goes on top of your mattress, which then provides something which then exchanges the heat of you as you lay on this mattress. You still have your bed sheet over this, or I don't know what the thing over this is then called, but what this allows you to do, at least in terms of the thing I have, is to cool down basically your bed and as well your body. So basically you lay either on this side or on the other side. It doesn't really matter on which side you lay on, but of course the bigger the contact area, the surface area, the better the heat exchange, or also the cold exchange, in some the temperature exchange. Now there are in an overview there are basically 3 different categories of devices like this. In my case now I have a budget version. That's kind of a very budget version. Then there are mid-tier devices, but actually there is not that much. And then there is the high tier device or high price devices. Now in terms of the high price devices, you might already have heard about this, maybe on Huberman Lab. It is called the 8 Sleep, so they are basically dominating the market, it seems, in the high priced category. For reference, how much would something like this cost? Currently the 4th generation of these devices has been out or has been announced, and this costs I think $2,000 or $2,500 for the device itself, which is basically the cover, as well as embedded in the cover you have basically tubes, and in these tubes there is water that flows. So you have water, this could be tap water or actually cleaned up water, I don't know the exact name for this, but in the newer generation it seems it is now also tap water, which then is filtered out. So basically the buildup of things that are in the long term not that much water any longer would then be filtered out. Now in addition to this, 8 Sleep also has a monthly subscription of I think at least $15 a month to just make this work. Now there are also a few devices in the middle, such as the Bad Jet, such as Chili Sleep, or also Sleep Me, which is kind of the same company, they just rebranded, and there also have been some rumors about bankruptcy of this company. Now 8 Sleep also has a sleep tracker embedded in the mattress, which seems to be fairly useful, because then it allows you to make automatic temperature changes. So it basically allows for an algorithm to then say, okay, we detected REM sleep on this stage, and based on the data we have, it seems to make sense to have maybe 1 degree Celsius cooler in REM sleep, and we then transition into a different phase. So basically to optimize the heat or the temperature of the mattress, or just on the thing you are actually lying on, for the different sleep stages, and therefore to increase your overall sleep score. Now in the middle we also have this Chili Sleep Sleep Me device, which then also has a sleep tracker, but it's not embedded in the mattress. It's about half the price compared to 8 Sleep, but there is also a subscription, and just in general it seems to, at least at this point in time, it seemed to not make sense financially for me to get a device like this, because of course it's an experiment, and the question of course is what the impact of something like this would be, not on my sleep score, but actually on my sleep quality, of which the sleep score is just a vector that maybe points to a better sleep quality. And the question also is, what would a marginal increase in sleep quality be worth of a financial investment compared to taking money I already have, or I now have, and basically investing it, for example, which would then be the alternative cost, maybe into the market at 5% a year, and what would be basically the thing be. Now of course one could argue, and this is also maybe now somewhat of my thinking, is that developing myself, mostly my body and brain, or both together, is probably the biggest investment I can make. So therefore increasing my sleep quality would be something worth doing, as time is kind of infinite, but only if you have kind of health, which then makes you the health, basically the limitation in health seems to make the time not infinite, because you then eventually die. So the longer, the better you basically can regenerate, the better your health at any given point in the future. At least that's kind of the thinking. So I was thinking, what would be the minimal or a minimal experiment I could already make that basically got me into this line of thinking, and also would then allow me to already experience basically different effects of this, or to see what the effects of this would be. And so I searched for a cheaper alternative, and this cheaper alternative was first of all the Matress cooler, which is a rebranded device, or it's a branded device, but the same device also sells without the branding if you buy it directly from manufacturers in China. And so I got the device that directly, or I bought it on AliExpress. And so this cost me 130 euros with shipping cost. It actually was only 60 to 80 euros, the device itself, and the additional thing was, I think, shipping cost. It might in total have been 120 or 130 euros. I can't exactly remember the price, but somewhere in this range. Now, the device I actually got is just basically a cooler that is like this big. It's like as big as a small computer, basically. And this is a heat exchanger. So there's a van in this, a fan, not a van. And then there is basically a grid where the water flows through, and there's a pump that brings the water basically into a small thing. And then the water dribbles down, and then on the top we have kind of this water base, and from there basically is pumped out into the mattress, and then the mattress itself has basically these two endings in which it goes in, and then the water flows somewhere in here, and then it flows out again. Now what this allowed me to do is to basically cool my body down. Now, in order to maybe mention why this would be specifically useful for me, is if I have, or I just assume from my subjective experience, that I have an ideal sleep temperature, or that makes me sleep. From all my observations, in which temperature do I fall asleep? It seems to be the following combination, or the combination of the following factors. First of all, my last meal has to have been a couple of hours before. Ideally, I am in a state in which I haven't eaten for hours, but I'm also not hungry. Now this, of course, is often somewhat contradictory, because the longer you haven't eaten, the more likely it is that you will become hungry again. But there seem to be these negative side effects of eating food. Mostly it is that my body temperature increases. Now this seems to be not mostly, but to some extent dependent on the macronutrients, not the macronutrients I intake. So this is now kind of a very simplified version of my thinking, as of basically the data I collected on this, mostly through taking notes on this and experimenting through the last years with my macros and so on and so forth. So it seems to be the case that if I train basically every single day. That's 30 minutes of training, either resistance training, or I go for a run or something like this. Now, if I do this, then my body seems to need nutrients. Now, also your body would probably need nutrients otherwise, but if I didn't train, and also if I don't train in the morning, I actually notice that my hunger kicks in hours later compared to if I do train in the morning, and I already burn in between 250 to 750 calories, depending on the workout I do. Now, I do actually train 30 to 40 minutes, which is the core time, not just 30 minutes, which would be sometimes maybe not result in so many calories. So, if I then have a resulting need in terms of regeneration, then my body is made out of, at least some parts of my body are made out of things. Now, of course, all parts of my body are made out of things, but what I actually wanted to say is that some parts of my body are made out of protein. Now, if I damage my muscles in the resistance training sessions specifically, what I think happens is that my body then needs a certain amount of protein in order to kind of be able to regenerate. Now, since also some of the regeneration seems to happen at night, and also with growth hormone release and kind of the early stages of sleep, maybe also mostly in deep sleep, I think, it seems to be useful that my body has somewhat the right macronutrients for regeneration, and my body seems at this point to also know that during the next day, in the morning, I will also train again. So what often has now been the case is that I have been kind of woken up I have tested for now basically years how I would eat, and then when I would fall asleep, and so on and so forth. And this works kind of well, so I basically have more leeway in terms of what macronutrients I take in winter, because I can just open the windows and then I have cooling. Now, since I do not have air cooling, and I do live in a continental climate, I am exposed to kind of colder winters and warmer summers, which means in winter it gets down to 0 or maybe -5 or -10 degrees Celsius, and in summer it gets anywhere from 20 to 30 degrees Celsius, maybe on average more. maybe sometimes it's 35 degrees Celsius. So what I'm trying to say here is that in summer I have less leeway for an increase in body temperature that then results in me. So I don't have cooling that basically could take away the increase in body temperature that stems from food. So as I have been experimenting with this, it seems to be the case that if I assume my body needs a certain amount of protein, just now in terms of the macronutrients, then by reducing mostly, it seems, the carbs, the fat seem to also have an impact, but the effect of fats as a source of body temperature increase seems to be less of a thing compared to the increase in body temperature that is due to carbs. So if I, for example, just drink 2 glasses of milk, then it seems to be the case that from the carbohydrates, and maybe I have a special condition, I don't know, where I have basically a response, my body responds by basically increasing the body heat, and I'm then basically sometimes sweating, but I am noticeably warmer compared to if I am just drinking protein shakes, for example, after my workout, and then I extend basically the phase in which I mostly then, in this case, I don't know if I actually mostly burn fat, but I'm probably higher in terms of the percentage that from my energy, which I need at any point in time. So my energy need is taken from carbs compared to fat. So if I'm in this stage, then my body temperature seems to be significantly lower. So now, for example, I drank milk 2 hours before, and so I have an increased heat that is basically almost not very pleasant in my hands as well as my feet. Of course, the hands and feet are only the points in which it shows the most, because the veins and arteries kind of cross over here. Now, how would a cooling device benefit me potentially? In the last years, I have experimented with, while brushing my teeth, sitting with the lower body in a rainwater tank which sits in my shower, which is kind of my cold bath version. Now this is also not cooled because I haven't I mean there are a couple of devices out there, and maybe there would be an option that would be viable for me, but this is also an experimentation. It comes with a certain cost, and so I have not invested in a cold exposure device. I did actually do cold exposure for maybe 1 to 2 years, almost every single day, but only with outdoor temperature. So the water was cooled basically by outdoors, and when it was not cooled by outdoors, then it was just the outdoor temperature. And the same is now true for this, but in terms of outdoor, basically just exchanging the outdoor temperature with room temperature, because, well, the water is about as warm with a certain buffer effect, not a buffer, but a latency effect. So this kicks in, so the water stores maybe the cold and the heat, and so there is a latency effect. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, I got this device, and it cost me, as I already mentioned, now 120 to 130 euros. And the idea is now that if I'm too hot, and this is now probably mostly due to the fact that I have, so if I eat carbohydrates, it seems that maybe, so this could be, it could just also not be the carbohydrates that is actually causing this. It could be more that if I eat carbohydrates, then I'm able to eat at a lower hunger level, which then allows me to overconsume in total energy consumption, which then leads to an increase in body heat. Now also protein seems to lead to an increase in body heat, but if I just eat as much protein until my hunger is satisfied, and I leave out mostly the carbohydrates or more of the carbohydrates, then it seems to be the case that my body temperature doesn't rise quite as much. So the idea is now, whenever I make a mistake, that I would have an additional tool in terms of cooling my body down, which then would allow me to easier sleep. And I have to say, to some extent, this has also now been the case. First of all, the device itself has 4 different stages of fan power and 4 different stages of pumping power. Now, one of the stages of fan power is that the fan is just turned off. Now, the fan is basically blowing air through. If this is where basically the water drops down from above to below, then the fan blows through and takes a little bit of the heat energy away. So basically, I have myself, myself includes a system of fluids that runs through my water and also distributes the heat through my body to a certain extent. Then I have additionally, now there might be different sources of heat and different the opposite of sources. I don't know what this would be. And then I have basically, by lying, let's just say it's my back, and I lie with maybe 50% of my back on this, then I basically attach now another loop, another closed system that also has kind of that is also a loop system or a tube system that has a fluid that is circulating, and now what I'm adding basically through this connection is that I'm adding, in addition to the surface area of my skin, basically the area within the ventilator that is cooled by the heat, which also needs obviously an additional energy source. So I'm basically allowing my body through this loop I basically am now attached to give off more heat at a certain point in time. So the heat rate, or the heat steam, or the steam off rate, whatever you want to call it, is then basically increased without the need for my body to do any more. Similar to how you shower cool, or you shower cold, or you go into a river, and then the heat, or some of the heat, is transported away from your body by a system that is not basically dependent on yourself. Now, and then the question is obviously, if you have this and you live, or you have a bedroom that has a certain amount of air in it, then the only thing you're actually doing is you're taking body heat and basically are bringing it faster into the air, because as long as there is no additional cooling, or there's no additional thing where the heat can go, you're basically just redistributing in a closed system the heat. Now, in order to basically resolve this situation, I think it is somewhat necessary, at least if you live, or if you are in a smaller bedroom and basically you want to get rid of some of the heat. Of course, now it is also a local redistribution. You are locally somewhat cooler in this room, and you're redistributing it to all of the air and also maybe the different things that are in this room. But you need to have, in this case, I think, another loop that is connected to this. In this case, the air loop, and for this analysis, I think it makes sense to just assume that the outer air is kind of infinite. So if you have the windows on incline, and I have two windows on incline, then basically I have a third loop, which then basically gets rid of the thermal energy that is stemming from my body. Now, there are, as I already mentioned, basically two settings. The first one is the fan speed, and the second one is the pumping speed, I think, at least. If I set the fan to 0, then the pumping speed can also be made differently, and there are different sounds, so I think it is the pumping speed. Now, the problem I had in the beginning was that this device, and the 8C, for example, seems to be fairly low in noise, but this device I had was not silent enough such that I could have it in the original tubes that came along with this device, connected to the mattress, and then maybe having it stand 1.5 meters away from where I would sleep. And so I basically could not sleep due to the noise. So out of the two things that would be worse, or out of the two variables that would negatively impact my sleep quality, it seemed that the heat then had a lesser impact compared to the noise that I would introduce by getting rid of some of the heat. So in order to resolve this, I had to come up with an idea, and this idea was to get tubes. So I got them actually now at a hardware supply store a couple of weeks, maybe even months ago. But of course, this is also something additional. It is kind of an experiment, because you buy these things, and I did not know whether I should bring the whole tower with me in a rucksack and just drive there. And so eventually I figured out that I just would bring basically the different things there. I brought actually the mattress, and the mattress also has these two hoses, I think they are called, on which I then could attach the tubes and also try out the tubes at the hardware supply store. Now the question was then, where in my apartment would I locate this device such that I would not hear it at night? Now what I do have to mention is that I wear usually earplugs at night when sleeping, because otherwise the noise seems to be too loud. Also because the windows are open, which means I have cars driving by, because I'm living in the city, which also means that, well, this noise is already somewhat negatively impacting my sleep. But what I notice is whenever I close these, first of all, I think that the oxygen is then the oxygen supply over the duration of the night seems to not be sufficient, and second of all, that I now am somewhat used to hearing kind of a background noise of cars driving by and overall environmental sound from the city, without which I cannot sleep, because that's just the association I seem to now have created, sleeping with basically the windows open. So now I got basically elongation tubes, and these elongation tubes now I bought in, I think, 10 meters in total, or maybe it's even 20 meters. So I think now each is only 5 meters, each tube. I just have to think. Yeah, it seems to be 5 meters. So I bought 10 meters of this, and also bought another tube in order to be able to drain basically my rainwater tank, which is my cold plunge in my shower base. Now, with this, I am able to now locate the device somewhere in my apartment, but I didn't want to have it just somewhere random stand in my apartment, so I actually now have it basically behind my computer, and I am sleeping basically below my desk because I am living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I searched for the longest time for a situation in this apartment where I could actually sleep and have kind of the different things that positively would contribute. So the noise from different sources so for example, the noise from the apartment door should ideally be, so my head, which is where I receive this noise, or at least then I computed also, not I computed, basically I have my ears here, that's what I'm trying to say. So the further I'm away from the source of the noise, the better it is, because then the noise is reduced. There also is this thing where the windows incline only on the right in my case, so if I sleep in the middle between these two things and the windows incline each on the right, then if I have my head here, then I'm obviously closer to the sound source here, whereas if I have my head here, then this one is closed, and since it inclines to the right, this also seems to positively impact my sleep. I for the longest time wondered why this would be the case, that if I slept like this, it would be better compared to this, apart from the fact that there is also some of my kitchen in between. So if I sleep like this, there is also some of my kitchen in the direct line of sight between my apartment door and where I then would sleep. So there is also a noise reduction from this sound source. But recently I discovered that this thing with, okay, the incline is on the right, so therefore I have a buffer, which is the other window, which buffers the sound in addition to the curtains I have on there, and also closed at night. So now I have it basically on top. So I sleep here, and then I have it here. But I do have a mattress here, which is basically cut in half somewhat. It's actually folded in half, which also means that at least on one side, I have kind of a noise reduction wall, which is maybe that thick, which is the half of the mattress, which means from the right side, which would be the side where I would hear kind of city sounds transmitted through the wall, there is also a noise reduction that is going on there, which also is a big factor, because previously I did not have this, and I just slept with the mattress under my desk in this direction, actually, in the same direction I actually stand in. And so this has also been a positive factor. Now, in addition, I actually also have, basically, if I sleep like this, and here is the folded mattress, then I have on this side also a curtain, and I don't have a curtain here and here, such that the airflow from the window that is here goes through here and here. So I actually have kind of a chamber in which I assume there is an airflow going, that also allows me to basically, think of it. If you would make a sleep box, then after quite some time in the sleep box, you would probably suffocate. But if I now want to regenerate optimally, then it would make sense at least to have me connected to a source of infinite oxygen, or at least approximating infinite oxygen, compared to me breathing the same air in a room again and again. And since my room is not that big, I think it's, 15 square meters, I think, in terms of the floor surface area. So it's also not that big. It has fairly high ceilings, but nonetheless, I think it is somewhat necessary that I have the windows on incline. Now, the noise, there are these two different noises that actually, the first one is from the fan, and the maximum level I can actually have it run at is 2. So there are 4 levels, with the 4th one being off, and then there is 1, 2, 3, with each one getting louder and then turning off. Then there are also the pumping levels, and if I put the device into the lowest noise mode, then this would be just the pump on, but then the water is not cooled. But if I have had run the device before, and I also don't actually have just in the last 2 hours maybe consumed half a liter of milk, then it seems to be the case, at least with the current spring temperatures outside, that I somewhat can be able to sleep. Now there is also an additional thing. Now first of all, the mattress is not, this mat cover is not as long as I am, or not as tall as I am, so it's only 150 in terms of the length, but this is what it is, and so this was the only device that seemed to make sense and seemed to also have been standardized and not just something random from AliExpress, but this other company basically had the same device, and so I was betting more on this device being somewhat experienced already, or somebody already had maybe thought about this a little bit more compared to other devices. It also comes in black, which is also nice. Now, the tubes attach basically, and I now have it in a way that if I lie here, that the cover is like this. So I actually sleep on a pillow with up from here until maybe here. I sleep on a pillow, which means there is no contact. I actually also experimented with the mattress on the pillow, but the mattress or the mat in which basically the cooling mat is not so bendable, so I think it makes more sense to have this other one on top. Also, I noticed the following phenomenon. If I have it run in the lowest mode, and this was now before I changed to the just pumping mode, before I had it actually run on the lowest fan mode and on the lowest pumping mode, but still both turned on, what I noticed is that if the nights became outside a little bit cooler, then I of course also have an additional cooling effect from outside. If it outside gets 10 degrees Celsius, 15 degrees Celsius compared to 20 degrees Celsius, then this also subtracts basically body temperature over the course of my sleep hours. So what I noticed is then that I would kind of wake up after a couple of hours of sleep, and that then it would be too cold to continue to sleep. What I also noticed is that then I had hunger actually, and this was in this case mostly protein hunger. So this is kind of goes along, I think, because if I had eaten more, then I would also have a longer, or would have a higher body temperature for longer. But it seems to be the case in the overall picture that having a lower body temperature, at least up until the point where you then don't wake up in the middle of the night and so hungry that you then want to eat, seems to optimize. So basically, lower body temperature seems to increase my sleep score, or at least, or also the quality of my sleep. So subjectively, now basically a subjective note by me compared to the sleep score, which maybe is not exactly aligned with sleep quality, but at least is approximating it. At least that's what I assume, even though there might be some measurement problems and so on and so forth, for which reason I also have two watches in order to have redundant sources of data, at least in terms of my sleep score, but also in terms of other metrics both of these watches track. So what now I also wanted to mention is, because this is now like this, I am sleeping like here, and then the mattress is like this, it is at least cooling up until the end of my feet. And I also, because the mattress is somewhat short, I often have my feet stick out, and due to basically how this whole setup is built up, if I have my feet stick out as well as my hand kind of move to the back, then I have both closer to the source of the airstream, which is basically the airstream that is provided by the inclined windows, and basically going through the under of my desk and then out again. And this also allows me to locally have kind of where my body lies a little bit of a higher temperature, which is somewhat useful, I think, during colder nights. And also to have the curtain that is basically also acting as a sound barrier. The curtain that is basically here, and here there is the mattress on this other side, so I have the curtain which also reduces the noise, which allows me to kind of have this sleep chamber thing, you could call it. And so what I now wanted to mention is that the tubes go basically through under my head. The tubes go out, these two tubes, and so what I am able to do is, even if I have basically only on the lower side of my body the total coverage by the mattress, and then I have my pillow, I am sometimes, this is now what I sometimes did, is I grab the tubes, which I have a little bit of leeway with, so I have maybe 50 centimeters of leeway, and of basically tube that is not stuck anywhere, and so I often grab it, but having it run one times basically through my hands often seems to not be enough. So if I had it run double through, but for this it is not enough, would allow me to exchange also heat with my hands. Additionally, to basically heat being exchanged through the surface area on my back, because I often, at least, or sometimes I sleep on my stomach and sometimes on my back. but I basically can grab this, and this also acts as a heat exchanger. I also often already thought about this. If you had something like a metal rod, which you could grab, and I also experimented with basically having a glass with frozen water inside and then having this in both of my hands, but it seemed to be the case that at least if you don't have further insulation out of the glass, that this is too cold and then restricts the blood vessels in your hands, such that the heat exchange that then doesn't happen just as well. So there seems to be kind of an ideal temperature, which is basically the max or the lowest temperature up from which you don't experience this vascular restriction, which then lowers basically the overall heat exchange or possible heat exchange rate. So it has been overall now a quite positive impact, I would say, at least in terms of the tools I can do. What I previously, or the tools I have in my toolbox in order to basically get rid of the negative effects of not optimal nutrition. I also have been kind of shifting to more and more protein in order to, which seems to overall, over the course of a week or a day even, or a day or a week even, seems to basically reduce my overall hungriness. And I also had this problem where and this is now another theory, if I consume food and there is something in there which my body needs more of, but I only have kind of a fixed macronutrient and micronutrient ratio or proportion of this food, then the only function my body has, if given basically ratio of these different things, is to take so long food into the body up until the thing that is the constraint, basically the lower limit, the lower limitation is basically met. So if I, for example, have the limitation which is protein, and this seems to be somewhat reasonable that this actually was somewhat of the limitation in the last years even, not only the last months, is that my body then would eat food up until the protein need was met, which then would overall mean that I actually over consumed food, and I then had basically had too much energy over the course of a given day because I needed to eat more of the given food because there was not enough bioavailable protein in there, which the only resolution for this would be, for the body at least, to make me eat more until my protein needs are met, because my body kind of knows that, okay, next morning we need to do resistance training again, and it will be hard if our muscles are not regenerated. So it seems to be the case that there are all of these factors, and one of which I also maybe should mention is that in summer as in winter, I experimented with having my lower body, I already mentioned this to some extent, basically in the cold plunge, which in summer is actually not that cold, and therefore also reducing my body temperature. There seem to be a few side effects. So one of this is, if the water is too cold, it seems to increase my alertness, maybe also cortisol, and then it could be the case that I am lying awake for 1 or 2 hours. Sometimes even with basically this higher alertness, but still I'm not sufficiently cool enough in order to be able to fall asleep. What also goes along with this is an elevated temperature, not an elevated temperature, but an elevated heart rate, which I can often hear because I'm also wearing these earplugs, but I could also see it. So if my heart rate is 60, 65, 71, I probably won't be falling asleep in the next 1 or 2 or 3 hours, even if I lie in bed and awake. There also seems to be this resting effect. So if I lie in bed and I'm awake, my mind is basically, because my body does not do anything, even though my mind is racing, it seems to be basically not coming to a... It's racing, or I have constantly thoughts, but the thoughts or the demand on the mind is not in a way such that I actually would I would actually take out energy from the mind. Instead, basically my mind is able to basically operate at the rate of energy need that it basically is continuing, because I'm continuously resting. I'm not standing additionally, so there is no additional physical demand, at least on my body, which probably leads to this kind of vicious circle or cycle in which I then sometimes have not been asleep for the whole night, which also sometimes happens, but I still kind of forced myself to be in bed. So this has now been an additional tool. And what I also have to mention, or what I additionally wanted to mention before with the bathroom cold plunge, is that this seems to have a net positive impact on my body composition. As long as I do this, even now in spring, it seems to be the case that my body composition, at least in terms of the body fat, seems to slowly over weeks kind of go downwards. If I then cancel this out again in order to possibly sleep better, because of the the alertness that is then reduced at the end of the day, because I'm doing this 15 minutes before I'm going to bed. Basically, when I'm brushing my teeth, I'm dunking my lower body in there. I tried this also with the whole body, and this is kind of this marginal improvement that you think in the moment is somewhat useful, and then you overate, and then in order to cool the body down, you then also take up until here the water I'm speaking of, and then you also have your hands in, or one of your hands, and with the other you're brushing your teeth. But then your alertness increases so much, and then you have this higher standard, which you then try to do every single day, which then results in you now being wide awake, or I think wide awake is the correct word, when now trying to get into bed. And you also notice then, which means you have basically a more of a leeway in terms of food, because you then have this tool which you then can use, the cold plunge, in order to get your body temperature down. So it allowed me to overconsume mostly carbs, which then led to this negative effect, and so I had to make up for it with cold plunging at the end of the day, which maybe now I have a better alternative for. But the problem seems to be that, at least in the current configuration, it seems to be too loud if I have it anything above basically just the pump. So even with the lowest fan and the pump, because of the body noise that is transmitted through basically my desk, and I haven't found an insulating mat, at least sound insulating mat, on which I could put the device. I also didn't want to have it on the floor somewhere. I did have it on the floor next to basically a window. So if this is the window on the left side, then this is the one that's on incline. And so I had it basically standing here on the bottom here, which means that despite this being a sound noise, the sound noise from, or the sound source from this device, the cooling device, and the window sound from outside, the environmental city sound, would kind of mix themselves up. And also because my head is kind of here, I would have basically a long distance in between those, and it would somewhat reasonably work. And having it then on basically the second fan configuration, as well as the second pump configuration, actually worked, and it did cool me significantly down, which made me think now I could maybe again leave out the cold plunging at the end of the day, which is not so much cold plunging in summer anyway. And in summer I actually would need it the most, but of course this is kind of, the indoor temperature is kind of correlated to kind of the outdoor temperature, and also therefore the cold plunge temperature. So it would make sense that if in winter, if the air outside is already cold, I would just use the air and maybe exchange it, such that I would have at least cool water in summer, but it doesn't work this way. I already thought maybe I get an additional device like this, and I would use the cooler, because it is also working with water, and use the cooler with my cold plunge. But I already tried this, and I had configured the tubes the wrong way around, and so it didn't work. But I also have this problem, I think, where if this is the cold tub, then I would have it here, so the water would actually have a gravity pressure that actually would drive it downwards into the device, and would basically mean that the device would overflow with water. The only solution for this would be to have it elevated at least at the height of the maximum water, the maximum water height in the tube, and I haven't found a solution for this. And this has been somewhat of an analysis of now the last 2 weeks of using this device. I tried this device before. I actually thought it was kind of defective, and I already wanted to basically send it back, but I also now already had the tubes, and I also already had it tried out with the tubes. And since I now have kind of this new sleep chamber with this 140 mattress, 140 in broad or wide, and then in terms of height, it's I think 2 meters. I now had already the best sleep scores kind of my life, at least the best ones tracked in this combination, but only in winter with basically the windows on incline. And so what is missing was a tool that would actually cool my body down at a reasonable cost, or at a reasonable price. I would want to try something like 8 Sleep in the future, maybe once it becomes financially viable for me, because this seems to be kind of the best product in this category. But as of now, this also seems to be a useful tool. Maybe I put it again outside, because then I could have it run higher. This was kind of a problem in the last couple of nights, where I had run it at just the pump in order to reduce the noise, because it is now sitting basically on top of where I sleep. And well, that's kind of the resolution, I think. Not the resolution, but the closing, at least, of this 39-minute video.